The wine cost $12,000 a bottle. Ethan Harrington poured it like water, filling 2 crystal glasses in the $48 million penthouse that overlooked Central Park like a kingdom spread below them. Outside, rain hammered against floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the silence was heavier than the storm. Zara Ellison Harrington watched her husband's hands, steady, confident, the hands of a man who'd never been denied anything in his life. She'd loved those hands once, the way they'd held hers during their Iceland proposal under the Northern Lights, the way they'd signed their marriage certificate 3 years ago, while cameras flashed and the world celebrated the ultimate power couple. Now those hands were holding a glass of wine he expected her to drink, while he explained why he needed permission to sleep with another woman. "I love you," Ethan said, his voice smooth as the vintage between them. "You're perfect, Zara. But before we start our family, before I become the devoted husband and father we've planned, I need one night, just one, to close a chapter I've left open too long." Zara's amber eyes didn't blink, didn't waver. She'd built a billion-dollar venture capital empire by reading people, by seeing through polished surfaces to the calculations underneath. She saw him perfectly now. "Victoria Langford," she said, not a question, a statement. Ethan had the grace to look uncomfortable for half a second. "It's not about feelings. It's a fantasy I've had for years. One night and then it's done. Then I'm yours completely. No secrets, no what-ifs." Victoria Langford, the ice-blonde socialite who collected married billionaires like rare art, who'd been circling Ethan for years with lingering touches at galas, late-night texts Zara had dismissed as networking, invitations to private investment dinners that always seemed to exclude wives. Zara had ignored the signs because she'd believed in the man she married, believed in the partnership they'd built, believed that being brilliant, beautiful, and powerful was enough to keep a man who'd promised forever. She'd been wrong. "Let me think about it," Zara said, her voice so calm it could have been discussing quarterly earnings. Relief flooded Ethan's face. He actually smiled, that billion-dollar smile that closed deals and charmed investors. He kissed her forehead like she'd just agreed to terms. "Take all the time you need," he said, "but you'll see, this is actually good for us. Honesty, no resentment building. After this, it's you and me forever." He went to bed that night satisfied, confident, a man who just negotiated his way out of a difficult conversation. Zara stood on the terrace in the rain, silk robes soaking through, mascara running down her face in tracks no one would ever see. She cried for 10 minutes, let herself feel the fracture of a heart that had believed in fairy tales, even after building an empire required killing every naive instinct she'd ever had. Then she stopped crying, dried her face, and made a decision that would destroy Ethan Harrington so completely the world would forget his name had ever meant anything. Because here's what Ethan didn't know. Zara Ellison wasn't just a billionaire who'd married into old money. She was a woman who'd built herself from Atlanta public schools to Forbes covers, who'd been underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked her entire life because of her skin, her gender, her refusal to make white men comfortable. She'd fought for every inch of power she had, and she'd learned something critical along the way. Revenge isn't about rage. It's about precision. Ethan had just asked the most dangerous woman in New York for permission to betray her. She was about to show him exactly what happens when you underestimate a queen. If you love stories about power, betrayal, and revenge served ice cold by someone who refuses to be anyone's second choice, hit that subscribe button. These stories take days to craft. Your support keeps them coming. Before Ethan tried to destroy everything, Zara Ellison had been a phenomenon. Not the kind born into it, the kind forged in fire. She grew up in Atlanta's West End, raised by a grandmother who worked 3 jobs after Zara's mother overdosed when she was 7. Their apartment had bars on the windows and roaches in the walls, But Grammy Ellison made sure Zara had books, structure, and a lesson that would define her life. Nobody's coming to save you, baby, so you save yourself. Zara got a full scholarship to Stanford studying computer science and finance. While her classmates networked at frat parties, she built her first app at 19, a micro-lending platform for underserved communities. Sold it at 23 for $40 million. Most people would have retired. Zara built Ellison Ventures. By 30, she was the youngest Black woman to crack the Forbes Billionaire list. By 32, her venture capital firm had funded 17 unicorns, startups that became billion-dollar companies under her guidance. She didn't just invest money, she saw potential where others saw risk, patterns where others saw chaos. Tech founders called her the Oracle. Wall Street called her terrifying. Zara called herself someone who refused to play small. She met Ethan Harrington at a charity gala where she was being honored for funding scholarships for underprivileged girls in STEM. He was heir to the Harrington Group, luxury hotels, commercial real estate, private equity, old money that had been white and powerful for 4 generations. He pursued her relentlessly, not with the clumsy entitlement she was used to from wealthy men, but with what felt like genuine fascination. He showed up at her office with questions about her investment strategy, sent handwritten notes, not generic flowers, talked about wanting a partner who challenged him, not a trophy. "I've dated women who want what I have," he told her on their 5th date, walking through Central Park at midnight. "You already have more than most of them could dream of. That's what I need." Zara, who'd spent her life being the smartest person in rooms that wanted her decorative, not decisive, fell for it. Their wedding was covered by Vogue, the New York Times, and every society blog that mattered. Zara in custom Vera Wang, Ethan in Tom Ford. A Black woman who'd built herself from poverty, marrying into American aristocracy. It was a narrative people wanted to believe in. For 3 years, it was good. Great even. They traveled, built strategic partnerships between their empires, talked about the children they'd have soon. Brilliant, beautiful children who'd inherit both legacies. Zara scaled back her 90-hour weeks, not because Ethan asked, but because she wanted to build space for family. Started delegating more at Ellison Ventures, turned down board positions, made room in her empire for the next chapter. She thought they were building something together. She didn't notice that Ethan was building an exit. The signs were there. She'd see them later with brutal clarity. The way he started traveling more for deals that never quite materialized. The late-night texts from Victoria that he dismissed as investor relations. The nights he came home smelling like perfume that wasn't Zara's signature scent. But Zara had been raised to trust carefully and completely once someone earned it. Ethan had earned it with 3 years of what seemed like devotion. So when he sat her down with $12,000 wine and asked permission to sleep with another woman, Zara's world didn't just crack, it shattered into pieces sharp enough to cut. And in the space where her trust had lived, something colder and infinitely more dangerous took root. Ethan Harrington thought he was negotiating with his wife. He had no idea he just activated a weapon he'd never see coming. Because Zara Ellison knew something about power that old money never learned. It's not about what you're born with. It's about what you're willing to burn down when someone tries to take what's yours. Ethan Harrington was a particular kind of dangerous, not obviously cruel, not the type who screamed or hit or drank himself into rage. He was the polished, insidious kind, the man who believed his own narrative about being progressive, enlightened, evolved. He'd married a Black woman, after all, a self-made billionaire who'd come from nothing. His parents had been concerned, code for horrified. His old money circle had whispered, but Ethan had pushed through. In his mind, that made him a hero, forward-thinking, someone who'd transcended the casual racism of his upbringing. What he never examined was whether he actually respected Zara, or whether she was the ultimate status symbol for a man who already had everything else. The truth lived in small moments Zara had excused. The way he'd introduce her at events as my wife, but mention Ellison Ventures as an afterthought, if at all. The way he'd explain her success to his friends as luck and perfect timing in tech. The way he'd touch the small of her back in public, possessive, performative, while dismissing her strategic advice in private. You're brilliant with startups, he'd say, smiling. But legacy real estate is different. Old rules. You wouldn't understand. Zara, who'd restructured failing portfolios worth billions, would swallow her response and tell herself he was protecting his ego. The Victoria situation had been building for 2 years. They'd met at a private equity conference in Monaco. Victoria Langford, 31, blonde, thin in that way that required personal trainers and elimination diets. Old money from Connecticut, professionally useless, famous only for being famous. She'd latched onto Ethan immediately. Long touches on his arm during conversations, private jokes, invitations to exclusive events that somehow never included Zara. She's strategic, Ethan had explained when Zara first questioned it. Connected to Middle Eastern investors I'm trying to access. It's business. Zara had believed him because she wanted to. Because questioning it meant acknowledging that her husband found value in a woman whose only currency was looking good at parties. The affair had started 8 months ago. Zara would realize this later when she reconstructed the timeline. Right after she'd told Ethan she was ready to start trying for a baby. Right after she'd made herself vulnerable in the way powerful women rarely allow. Ethan had panicked. Not visibly, he was too controlled for that. But internally, the prospect of being locked into fatherhood, into permanence with a woman who was smarter and richer and more successful than him, had triggered something. He turned to Victoria, to someone who made him feel like the most important person in the room because she had no accomplishments of her own to compete with. The text Zara would find later told the story. Victoria, when are you leaving her? Ethan, it's complicated. Prenup, her money. Victoria, I don't care about money, baby. I care about you. Ethan, I know, soon. I just need the right moment. But Ethan was too smart to just leave. Divorce would cost him. The prenup Zara's lawyers had insisted on was ironclad. He'd get nothing from her empire, and his own fortune, while substantial, was a fraction of hers. So he'd conceived a plan that was both calculated and breathtakingly arrogant. Get Zara's permission. Frame it as honesty, openness, a conscious uncoupling of sexual exclusivity before recommitting fully. Make it sound evolved, therapeutic even. If she agreed, he'd have his night with Victoria. If she didn't, well, he'd positioned himself as the honest partner who tried to communicate his needs. Either way, he won. What Ethan fundamentally misunderstood was that Zara's quiet strength wasn't weakness. It was control. And he just handed her a reason to stop controlling the rage she'd been building for months. The queen had been patient long enough. Now came the reckoning. If your partner asked for one free night with someone they'd been obsessing over, would you see it as honesty or betrayal? Where's the line? What Ethan never bothered to learn about Zara was how she'd actually built her empire. Not through luck, not through perfect timing, through a specific skill that had served her from Atlanta classrooms to Stanford dorms to Manhattan boardrooms. Seeing what others missed. Patterns in data, lies in body language, potential in chaos. And 6 months ago, she'd seen something in Harrington Group's finances that she'd chosen, out of love, to ignore. It started innocuously. Ethan had asked her to review a joint investment opportunity, a luxury hotel development in Dubai that would blend Harrington real estate expertise with Ellison Ventures' tech-forward hospitality model. Zara had run the numbers. Something was off. Not obviously. The projections were solid, the partnerships legitimate, but there were transactions buried in the footnotes that didn't match the narrative. shell companies receiving payments, consulting fees to entities that didn't seem to exist. She dug deeper, not suspiciously, just thorough the way she always was. What she found was a pattern of embezzlement so sophisticated it had been running for 3 years. Ethan was siphoning money from Harrington Group's international operations. Not huge amounts, nothing that would trigger audits. Just enough to build a private fund in the Cayman Islands. Approximately $47 million so far. Zara had sat with that information for weeks, wrestled with it. Ethan's family had built Harrington Group over 4 generations. If this came out, it wouldn't just destroy him, it would devastate his parents, his sister, hundreds of employees. She decided to confront him privately, give him a chance to explain, to fix it, to trust her with the truth. Then Victoria's name had shown up in the transfer records. Recipient of $2.3 million in consulting fees over 8 months. Ethan wasn't just stealing from his family, he was funding his affair. Zara had closed the laptop, encrypted the files, decided to believe this was a mistake she didn't understand. That was 6 months ago. Now, standing on the terrace in the rain after Ethan had asked permission to betray her, Zara pulled out that encrypted drive. She'd kept it hidden, backed up in 3 locations, waiting. Not because she'd planned this, but because Zara Ellison hadn't survived a hostile world by being unprepared. She opened the files and started building something new, a complete forensic map of Ethan's fraud. Every transaction, every shell company, every lie that would unravel if pulled correctly. And then she made 3 calls. First, Jade Chen, her best friend since Stanford, and currently a senior partner at the most aggressive litigation firm in New York. I need a divorce attorney, quietly, and I need to understand how to dismantle a fraud scheme without getting implicated. Jade didn't hesitate. I'll send someone tomorrow, someone airtight. Second, Marcus Way, her head of security at Ellison Ventures, former FBI white-collar crimes division. I need surveillance, on my husband, everything. Marcus's response was one word, done. Third, her own lawyer, the one who drafted her prenup. Start preparing severance documents. I want out clean. Ethan thought he'd asked for one night. He'd actually given Zara the justification she needed to stop protecting him from himself. And Zara Ellison, who'd been underestimated her entire life, was about to show him what happened when someone with her intelligence decided to stop playing defense. The game had changed. He just didn't know it yet. 3 days after Ethan's request, Zara gave him her answer. Not at home, not in private, at the Harrington Annual Charity Gala, the event his family hosted every year to celebrate their philanthropic legacy and reinforce their social dominance. 800 guests, old money, new money, and everyone who mattered in New York's power structure. Zara wore Alexander McQueen, black silk that looked simple until she moved and it caught light like liquid shadow. Jewelry so understated it made a statement. She didn't need to prove anything. Ethan wore his confidence like cologne. He'd spent 3 days being attentive, affectionate, patient, the loving husband waiting for his progressive wife to see reason. They worked the room together, smiled for photographers, posed with donors, the perfect power couple. Midway through dinner, between the second and third course, Zara stood, tapped her champagne glass with a knife until conversation died and 800 faces turned toward her. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, she said, voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. The Harrington family has built an incredible legacy of giving back. It's been an honor to be part of that for 3 years. Ethan smiled up at her, confused but pleased. Public declarations of support weren't unusual at these events. But tonight, Zara continued, I want to announce something personal. The room leaned in. This was unexpected. My husband recently asked me for something that required deep reflection. She turned to look at Ethan, her expression unreadable. He asked for permission to pursue a fantasy he's had for years. One night of freedom before we commit fully to building our family. You could hear silk rustling as people shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's face drained of color. At first I was hurt, Zara said, voice steady as stone. But then I realized, he's right. Honesty matters. So I'm giving him what he asked for. Relief flickered across Ethan's face for half a second. I'm giving him one night, Zara said. One night to do whatever he wants, and then our marriage ends. Divorce papers will be filed tomorrow, because I've realized something important. A man who asks permission to betray you has already betrayed you in every way that matters. The ballroom erupted, gasps, whispers exploding into full conversations, cameras flashing as society reporters realized they just witnessed the scandal of the season. Ethan stood, face red. Zara, this isn't... You're misunderstanding. Am I? She pulled out her phone, displayed a text message projected onto the screens meant for donor presentations. Ethan's number, Victoria's name, messages detailing their 8-month affair, plans to leave Zara, discussions about money and timing. You wanted honesty, Zara said. Here it is. She descended from the stage, set her napkin on the table, and walked out of the ballroom. The room erupted into chaos behind her. Ethan shouting her name, his mother looking like she might faint, his father's face purple with rage, not at Ethan's affair, but at the public humiliation. Victoria Langford, who'd been sitting 3 tables over as a friend of the family, tried to leave quietly. Someone blocked her exit. Within minutes, social media was ablaze with photos, speculation, and the complete text Zara had just projected. #Harrington Scandal trended within the hour. Zara went home, changed into comfortable clothes, poured herself real wine, not the $12,000 performance bottle, just something good from her personal collection. And she waited for Ethan to come home raging, for his lawyers to call, for the consequences to start rippling through their carefully constructed life. She just destroyed him socially. His reputation was in ruins. His affair was public. His family was humiliated. But Zara wasn't done. This was just the opening move. Because Ethan didn't know yet about the financial files, the fraud, the embezzlement that would destroy not just his reputation, but his freedom. He thought the worst had happened. He had no idea the worst was still coming. And it would be precise, legal, and absolutely devastating. Zara Ellison played chess while everyone else played checkers, and checkmate was 3 moves away. Ethan came home at 2 a.m., drunk and desperate. Zara heard him stumbling through the penthouse, calling her name. She stayed in the guest suite she'd moved into that afternoon, door locked, lights off. He pounded on the door. Zara, open up! We need to talk. She didn't respond. You humiliated me, my family. Do you have any idea what you've done? Still nothing. I made a mistake, okay? But you don't blow up our marriage in front of 800 people. That's not how adults handle things. Zara turned up the volume on her noise-canceling headphones and went back to work. By morning, Ethan had passed out on the living room couch. Zara stepped over him on her way out, designer bag on her shoulder, perfectly composed. She had 3 meetings that would end him. Meeting 1, her divorce attorney. Margaret Reeves was 70, brilliant, and had a reputation for destroying entitled men. She'd handled divorces for celebrities, politicians, and billionaires who wanted blood. Your prenup is bulletproof, Margaret said, reviewing the documents in her corner office. He gets nothing from Ellison Ventures. His stake in joint properties is limited. You're protected. Good. Now I want to go further. Zara slid across a folder. Harrington Group has been illegally transferring funds for 3 years. $47 million to offshore accounts controlled by my husband. Some of that money funded his affair. I have complete documentation. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Have you shared this with authorities? Not yet. I'm offering Ethan a choice. Divorce quietly, accept my terms, and I keep this private. or fight me and I release everything to the SEC, the IRS, and every media outlet that matters. That's aggressive. That's justice. Meeting 2, the Harrington Group Board. Ethan's father, Richard Harrington, had called an emergency board meeting, not to support his son, to contain the damage. Zara attended as she was entitled to, holding the 8% stake she'd acquired through marriage and investment. Richard glared at her across the mahogany table. "You've made your point, Zara. The public stunt was unnecessary." "Was it?" Zara's voice was ice. "Your son asked permission to cheat on me. In what world is that a private matter? Family issues should stay private. Then maybe you should have raised a son who understood that marriage vows matter." She opened her laptop. "But since we're discussing family business, let's talk about these." She displayed the first set of transfers. Offshore accounts, shell companies, missing millions. The board went silent. "Ethan has been embezzling from Harrington Group for 3 years, Zara continued. "I have documentation, forensic analysis, communications proving intent." Richard's face went from red to ash gray. "You're lying." "I'm not, and here's your choice. Remove Ethan from all leadership positions immediately, cooperate with my divorce, and I'll let you handle this internally. Or protect him, and I release this to federal investigators." She closed her laptop. "You have 24 hours. Meeting 3, Victoria Langford. Zara arranged this meeting at a cafe in Soho. Public enough to be safe, quiet enough to be private. Victoria arrived late, designer sunglasses hiding what Zara suspected were exhausted, crying eyes. "What do you want?" Victoria's voice was brittle. "I want you to understand something," Zara said. "You didn't win anything. Ethan didn't leave me for you. He asked permission to cheat, got exposed, and now he's losing everything. You were never the prize. You were the fantasy, and fantasies don't survive reality." Victoria's lip trembled. "He said he loved me." "He loved the idea of you, someone who made no demands, who didn't challenge him, who wasn't smarter or richer or more successful." Zara leaned forward. "I don't hate you, Victoria. I pity you, because you settled for being someone's escape instead of someone's equal." She stood, leaving $40 for a coffee Victoria hadn't touched. "Enjoy your scandal. You earned it." By evening, 3 things had happened. 1. Harrington Group's board voted unanimously to remove Ethan from all positions, pending investigation. 2. Ethan's accounts were frozen by his own family. 3. Federal investigators received an anonymous tip about irregular financial activity. Zara went home, fed her fish, and opened a bottle of wine. The empire had struck. Now came the collapse. The collapse happened faster than even Zara anticipated. Within 72 hours, Ethan Harrington went from billionaire heir to persona non grata. The Harrington Group board didn't just remove him, they launched a full forensic audit. When the scale of his embezzlement became clear, they issued a press release distancing the family from his unauthorized activities and promising full cooperation with authorities. Translation: they threw him to the wolves. His father refused his calls. His mother released a statement through her publicist expressing deep disappointment and asking for privacy. His sister changed her phone number. The family that had defined itself by loyalty for 4 generations cut Ethan loose the moment he threatened their empire. Meanwhile, the SEC opened a formal investigation. The IRS followed. Journalists who'd celebrated his wedding to Zara 3 years ago now wrote exposés about entitled rich kids who believed rules didn't apply to them. Victoria disappeared to her family's Connecticut estate, social media accounts deleted, publicists issuing a statement about her being deeply misled and another victim in this situation. She'd realized too late that Ethan had nothing left to offer her. Ethan's assets froze. His credit cards were declined. His luxury cars were repossessed by the family lawyers who technically always owned them. Even the penthouse, which he'd assumed was his, turned out to be in a Harrington family trust he had no control over. He'd built his entire identity on being heir to a fortune. Now he was just a man facing federal charges with no money for a decent defense attorney. He tried reaching Zara. Emails bounced. Calls blocked. He showed up at Ellison Ventures and security escorted him out before he reached the lobby elevators. Finally, desperate, he waited outside her penthouse, the one property he knew she actually owned. When Zara arrived from a board meeting, she found him sitting on the hallway floor, looking 10 years older than he had a week ago. "Zara, please, 5 minutes." She should have walked past, should have called security, but she wanted to see it, needed to witness what happened when arrogance met consequences. "5 minutes," she said, unlocking the door. They sat in her living room, different from the penthouse they'd shared, smaller, more personal, a space Ethan had never been welcome in. "I'm sorry," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I was an idiot. I took you for granted. I don't know what I was thinking." "You were thinking," Zara said quietly, "that I'd always be there, that I'd forgive you because I loved you, that your name and your family and your confidence were enough to weather any consequence." "I know, I was wrong." "You were," she stood, "but here's what you'll never understand, Ethan. I didn't destroy you because you asked to cheat. I destroyed you because you fundamentally didn't respect me. Every decision you made, the affair, the embezzlement, the arrogance, came from believing you were more important than I was." "That's not true." "It is. You married me because I was impressive, but you never saw me as an equal. I was a trophy, a story you told about being progressive. And the moment I became inconvenient, the moment building a family meant actual commitment, you looked for an escape." Ethan's face crumpled. "So what now? You've ruined me. My family's done with me. I'm facing criminal charges. What else is there?" Zara walked to the door, held it open. "Now you learn what the rest of us already know, that power isn't a birthright, it's earned. And when you abuse it, it gets taken away." "Zara, goodbye, Ethan." He left. She closed the door. And for the first time in a week, Zara felt something close to peace. Not because she'd destroyed him, because she'd finally stopped carrying the weight of his disrespect. She'd been enough all along. He'd just been too small to see it. The trial took 8 months. Federal prosecutors built their case methodically. Wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering through shell corporations. The evidence Zara had compiled, then anonymously provided to investigators, was airtight. Ethan's defense attorney tried arguing that he'd made mistakes but hadn't intended criminal conduct, that he'd been planning to return the money eventually, that his personal life had been in crisis and affected his judgment. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a black woman in her 60s who'd built her career prosecuting white-collar crime, looked at Ethan with something close to contempt. "Mr. Harrington, you were born into privilege most people can't imagine. You were given opportunities, education, and resources that could have been used to build something meaningful. Instead, you stole from your own family, lied to your wife, and demonstrated a pattern of behavior that shows you believe you were above consequences." She sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison, full restitution of the $47 million, permanent ban from serving as an officer or director of any public company. Ethan's face was pale as they led him away in handcuffs. Zara wasn't in the courtroom. She didn't need to be. She was in her office at Ellison Ventures, reviewing proposals for a new fund, $500 million dedicated to companies founded by women of color who'd been systematically denied access to capital. Her assistant knocked. The verdict came in. Guilty, 7 years. Zara nodded once. "Thank you." She went back to work. Because Ethan's downfall had never been the point, It was just the consequence of him trying to diminish someone who'd learned long ago not to shrink. While Ethan went to prison, the court of public opinion delivered its own verdict. Think pieces were written about entitled men who married successful women and then resented them for it, about the specific way Black women's achievements were treated as threatening, about how Ethan had wanted Zara's prestige without her power, her beauty without her brain. Zara became a symbol. Not intentionally, she rarely did press, but her story resonated. The woman who'd been asked to accept betrayal and instead burned down the man who dared ask. Speaking invitations poured in. Book deals, documentary offers. She declined most of them. Accepted a few strategic ones. TED Talk, Oprah interview, Harvard Business School commencement address. In every appearance, her message was consistent. Know your worth, protect your peace, and never make yourself smaller for someone who should have been trying to match your height. The TED Talk went viral. 40 million views in 6 weeks. Young women, especially Black women, started quoting her. "I didn't destroy him. I just stopped protecting him from himself." You can't betray someone who respects you. 100. Betrayal only works when you think you'll get away with it. Power isn't revenge. Power is building something so strong that someone else's absence doesn't even register as loss. Zara's profile grew beyond business. She became a cultural icon. Memes, hashtags. A generation of women who saw her as proof that you could be soft and strategic, feminine and fierce, loving and unwilling to tolerate disrespect. The Harrington family never recovered their reputation. Richard Harrington resigned from the board in disgrace. The company was sold to a private equity firm. The luxury hotels that had carried their name for 4 generations were rebranded. Victoria Langford tried rebuilding her social media presence. It never worked. The comments never stopped reminding her she'd been the other woman who'd picked the wrong side of history. She eventually moved to London. Quiet life. No more parties. No more married men. And Ethan? 7 years in a federal prison where his name meant nothing, where guards didn't care about his pedigree, where he was just another inmate who thought he was too special for consequences. He wrote Zara letters, apologies, explanations, promises that he'd changed. She never opened them. Because Zara Ellison had learned the most important lesson. Closure doesn't come from the person who broke you. It comes from building yourself so completely that their brokenness can't touch you anymore. The full scope of Ethan's collapse played out in ways even Zara hadn't anticipated. The court-ordered restitution of $47 million was just the beginning. Ethan's legal defense had cost another $3 million, paid by liquidating every asset he'd personally owned. The penthouse, family trust, went back to his parents. His art collection, purchased with embezzled funds, was seized. His cars, his watches, his designer wardrobe, all auctioned to repay creditors. By the time he entered prison, Ethan Harrington had negative net worth and a credit score in the low 400s. The society that had celebrated him as a golden boy turned on him with vicious speed. Every club he'd belonged to revoked his membership. Yale, his alma mater, removed his name from donor lists. Friends who'd partied with him stopped returning calls. His ex-girlfriend from college gave an interview saying she'd always known he was entitled and emotionally stunted. His former college roommate wrote a Medium post about Ethan's pattern of treating people like accessories. Everyone wanted distance from the scandal. This hurt him most. His father never visited, never wrote. The message was clear. Ethan had stopped being a Harrington the moment he'd threatened the family empire. His mother came once to the prison. A cold, formal visit where she explained that the family had set up a small trust that would provide $30,000 annually after his release for basic living expenses, not comfort. Translation: enough to survive, not enough to rebuild. His sister sent one email. "You embarrassed us all. I hope it was worth it. The family that had defined his identity had cut him out completely. Prison reality. Federal prison wasn't the violent nightmare of TV dramas, but it was devastating in other ways. Ethan was nobody, not powerful, not special. Just another white-collar criminal who'd stolen and gotten caught. His cellmate was a former accountant who'd embezzled from a children's charity. They had nothing to say to each other. Guards called him by his number, not his name. Meals were scheduled. Movement was controlled. Every shred of autonomy that had defined his existence, gone. He worked in the prison library. Minimum wage, mandatory. At night, he'd lie in his narrow bunk and think about Zara, the penthouse, the life he'd had, the moment he'd asked for one night and thrown away forever. Victoria had her own reckoning. Brands that had sponsored her content dropped her immediately. Her follower count plummeted from 890,000 to 180,000 as people unfollowed in waves. She tried rebranding, posted about healing and learning from mistakes. The comments were merciless. You helped a married man steal from his family. You're only sorry you got caught. Imagine destroying your reputation for a man who's in prison now. She eventually deleted all social media, moved to London, married a minor British aristocrat who didn't Google her before proposing. She got her title and her quiet life, but she'd never be the influencer she'd imagined. Never have the power she'd thought sleeping with Ethan would provide. She'd gotten exactly what she'd earned, nothing. While Ethan rotted in prison and Victoria hid in obscurity, Zara thrived. Not because of their downfall, though there was satisfaction in knowing they'd faced consequences, but because she'd finally stopped letting someone else's opinion of her worth dictate her reality. She'd been enough before Ethan. She was enough after. And that realization was worth more than any revenge could ever be. 2 years after the trial, Zara stood on a different kind of stage. Not defending herself, not explaining her choices, simply existing in the power she'd always possessed. She'd launched the Ellison Foundation with $200 million in initial funding. Its mission, providing capital, mentorship, and legal support to women entrepreneurs, especially women of color, who'd been systematically denied access to traditional venture funding. In 2 years, the foundation had funded 127 companies. 63 of them were now profitable. 12 were on track to become unicorns. Zara wasn't just investing money. She was building an ecosystem that would outlast her. Young women who'd grown up like she had, brilliant but broke, capable but overlooked, now had a path that didn't require marrying into power or compromising their worth. They could build their own empires. Forbes named her Businesswoman of the Year. Time put her on their 100 most influential people list. The Obama Foundation invited her to speak at their annual summit. But the recognition that meant most came from a letter that arrived from a young woman in Atlanta. Dear Ms. Ellison, I grew up in the same neighborhood you did. I watched my mother work 3 jobs and still struggle. I thought women like us didn't get to build empires. We just survived them. Then I saw your story. Not just that you became a billionaire, but that you refused to shrink when someone tried to make you small. I'm applying to Stanford this year because of you. Thank you for existing loudly. Zara kept that letter framed in her office. Because that was the real victory, not destroying Ethan, but building something that showed other women they didn't have to accept disrespect to have power. Zara's therapist, a Black woman who specialized in high-achieving professionals, helped her process the complicated emotions. You're allowed to be angry, Dr. Williams said during one session. You're also allowed to grieve what you thought you had. I don't miss him, Zara said. I miss who I thought he was. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't just break trust, it breaks your belief in your own judgment. So how do I trust again? Dr. Williams smiled. You start by trusting yourself. You saw the signs. You were strategic. You protected yourself. Your judgment was perfect. You just chose to love someone anyway. That wasn't weakness, that was courage. Zara cried in that session, the kind of deep, cleansing tears she'd been holding back for 2 years. Not because she regretted destroying Ethan's life, because she'd finally forgiven herself for loving someone who hadn't deserved it. Zara started dating again, carefully, on her terms. She met Julian at a tech conference, a founder whose company she was considering investing in. He was brilliant, kind, secure enough in his own success that hers didn't intimidate him. "I Googled you," he said on their first date. "The Ethan thing, that was intense," Zara finished. "I was going to say justified," he smiled. "He asked for one night. You gave him 7 years to think about it. That's poetry." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. They took it slow, no rushing, no assumptions, just two people building something real because they wanted to, not because they needed to. On the 3-year anniversary of signing divorce papers, Zara did something symbolic. She bought the Harrington family's former flagship hotel, the one they'd been forced to sell during the scandal, rebranded it as the Ellison, and turned it into a conference center specifically for women's business summits, startup pitch competitions, and leadership retreats. Every room where a Harrington had once conducted business now hosted women building their own empires. That was the real revenge, not destruction, replacement. The invitation was simple: cream cardstock, elegant script. "You are invited to the grand opening of the Ellison Legacy Center." Zara had built it in her old Atlanta neighborhood, where Grammy had raised her in that apartment with bars on the windows, where she'd learned that nobody was coming to save her. Now it stood, a gleaming 200,000 square foot facility offering free business education, co-working space, legal clinics, and startup accelerators to anyone who walked through the doors. 1,500 people attended the opening. Journalists, founders she'd funded, young women who'd grown up like she had and now had a path. Grammy Ellison, now 87, cut the ribbon with Zara's help. "I'm proud of you, baby," Grammy whispered, "not because of the money, because you didn't let them make you small." Zara hugged her and didn't let go for a long time. Later that night, Zara's phone buzzed with a news alert. Ethan Harrington released early from federal prison after 5 years. She felt nothing, not satisfaction, not anger, just a distant acknowledgement that someone who'd once been central to her life was now a footnote. She deleted the notification and went back to the celebration. Ethan's release was quiet. No media coverage beyond the initial headline. No family waiting at the gate. He walked out with $47 in his prison account, the clothes he'd worn when processed, and a halfway house address. The trust fund his mother had established gave him $2,500 monthly, enough for a studio apartment and groceries. Nothing more. He got a job at a property management firm, entry level, minimum wage plus commission. Nobody recognized him, or if they did, nobody mentioned it. He'd become what he'd most feared: ordinary, irrelevant. A cautionary tale people referenced without remembering his name. One night, scrolling on a library computer, he couldn't afford a phone, he saw an article about Zara's Legacy Center, saw her smiling with her grandmother, read about the hundreds of businesses she'd funded, the thousands of lives she'd changed. He thought about writing her, apologizing one more time. Then he closed the browser, because he finally understood she didn't need his apology, didn't need his acknowledgement, didn't need anything from him at all. She'd moved on so completely that his entire existence had become irrelevant to her story. And that, more than the prison, more than the poverty, more than the public humiliation, was the real consequence. He hadn't just lost Zara, he'd lost the chance to be part of something extraordinary, and that loss would follow him the rest of his life. Zara went home that night to the penthouse she'd bought after the divorce. Julian was already there, cooking dinner, making her laugh. She'd built everything she had now: the empire, the foundation, the legacy, the love. And she'd built it all without needing permission from anyone, especially not from the man who'd asked for one night and lost forever. Here's what Zara's story teaches us. Betrayal is a gift. Not because it doesn't hurt, it does, devastatingly, but because it shows you exactly who someone is when they think you'll forgive anything. Ethan asked for one night, but what he was really asking for was permission to disrespect Zara and face no consequences. He'd believed, because the world had taught him, that his name, his confidence, his presence were enough to weather any storm. He'd forgotten something crucial. Zara Ellison had built her empire from nothing. She'd survived poverty, racism, sexism, and every barrier the world could throw at her. A man asking to cheat was barely a footnote in her history of overcoming. The lesson isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries, about knowing your worth so deeply that someone else's inability to see it becomes their problem, not yours. Zara could have fought for the marriage, could have gone to therapy, could have convinced herself that his honesty meant he was really trying. Instead, she chose herself. That's not cold, that's wisdom. Because here's the truth. People who genuinely love you don't ask permission to betray you. They don't negotiate the terms of their loyalty. They don't treat commitment like a contract they can temporarily opt out of. And when someone shows you that your worth is conditional, that they'll honor you only when it's convenient, believe them. Then build something so extraordinary that their absence becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. 5 years after Ethan asked for one night, Zara had built a foundation that changed thousands of lives. She'd found love with someone who saw her fully. She'd created a legacy that would outlive her. And Ethan? He got exactly what he'd asked for. One night with Victoria, followed by 7 years thinking about it in prison, followed by a lifetime of knowing he'd traded forever with a queen for an evening with a mirage. Some people spend their whole lives learning that lesson. Ethan learned it the hard way. If this story hit you, if you believe in protecting your peace, knowing your worth, and building instead of begging, smash that subscribe button. Drop a comment about a time you chose yourself over someone who took you for granted. And hit like if you think Zara handled this perfectly. See you in the next story. Until then, remember, never shrink yourself for someone who should have been trying to match your height. You're the empire. Act like it.